Picture this. It's 1968. You're flipping through a motorcycle magazine and you see a photo of the weirdest three-wheeled vehicle you've ever laid eyes on. It's got a Velocette engine, hand-formed aluminium bodywork, and it looks absolutely mad. That's the kind of image that can be tucked away and stuck in your head for at least 40 years. This is the story of Derek Manders, his mate Dave Wells, and the bizarre British special called the Howcette. It's a story about obsession, engineering brilliance, and what happens when you finally track down something that's haunted you for 4 decades. I'm Not Us John, and welcome to 7 Spot. Before we get started, please take a moment to give us a like and subscribe. It really helps YouTube find and distribute our stories. Derek Manders and Dave Wells were proper motorcyclists in the late 1960s. Everything old and British, Derek with a Velocette and Dave a Norton 16H. They were living the life in an era when British motorcycling was still the pinnacle of cool. Then they saw it. This peculiar three-wheeler in a magazine article. They had no idea what it was called, who built it, or where it came from. Just this grainy black and white photo of something that looked like it had escaped from a particularly fevered dream. Derek lived in Lincoln at the time, halfway up a steep hill in a terraced house. Not exactly ideal for playing with motorbikes. You couldn't even get a bike down the passage, let alone have anywhere to run with it. But that mysterious three-wheeler? That image lodged itself in his brain and stayed there. Life happened. Derek eventually built a low-cost from Ron Champion's famous book in 1996, which tells you everything you need to know about his character. Dave kept collecting interesting motorcycles. The years rolled by, but that strange three-wheeler never quite left their minds. Fast forward to 2004. 36 years after seeing that photo, Derek pops around to Dave's place to see what bikes he's picked up recently. Standard mate behaviour. Then Dave gets this massive grin on his face and says, "You'll never guess what I've bought." Derek immediately knew. That 40-year-old memory came flooding back in an instant. "You've bought the Howcette, haven't you?" And he bloody well had. Dave had tracked it down through an advertisement at an auto jumble and vintage show. It came with a small bundle of paperwork, including the original 1968 Motorcycle magazine article by Bob Curry and a 1978 motorcycle news piece about it winning MCN's Special of the Year award. There was just one small problem. Dave had bought it and stored it in a safe lockup, then promptly forgot where he'd put it. Business got in the way, and it took a while before the Howcette finally re-emerged from storage. But when it did, that's when the real work began. The name Howcette comes from its builder, Bob Howard, a motor engineer from West Bridgford, Nottinghamshire, combined with Velocette. Not the most creative naming convention, but it works. Bob started building this thing around 1963, and when I say he was a proper engineer, I mean proper engineer. This wasn't some bloke bodging things together. Well, it was some bloke in a shed, but he knew exactly what he was doing. The chassis is based on the bottom part of a Velocette frame, 1 5/8 inch tubing, allied to a brazed space frame of 1 3/8 inch tubing. Classic period construction, properly executed. Then Bob went parts bin raiding in the best possible way. Front wheels and brakes from a Ford Popular, anchored with Morris Minor fittings. Steering column from a Rover 2000, hinged with a reduction box sitting between your knees. Woodhead Munro dampers, and of course a Velocette engine, originally a 500cc MSS, later upgraded to a Venom. The whole thing runs on 12-volt positive earth off a car dynamo that's been converted to run in the opposite direction. The bodywork is hand-formed and riveted aluminium. Proper coach building. Every panel shaped by hand, every rivet placed deliberately. This is craftsmanship. The whole thing runs motorcycle style with a kickstart, but the clutch is hydraulically operated via a left foot pedal. Brakes are right foot, car style. There's a hand throttle using a motorcycle choke lever. The 4-speed MSS gearbox has no reverse because, well, It's a motorcycle gearbox. According to the original 1968 test, you're basically squeezed, or should I say squashed, into the cockpit, especially if you're plus-sized or wearing a warm coat. The steering is ridiculously positive. Less than one turn, lock to lock. That's not an accident. Bob Howard calculated that. He understood what he was building. Derek and Dave set about properly sorting the Howcette. This wasn't a full nut and bolt restoration. The car was fundamentally sound, but it needed recommissioning, checking, sorting all those little things that happen when something sits for years. In April 2012, the Howcette passed its MOT. A couple of weeks later, it completed the Wold's Classic bike run. That's not just getting it running, that's getting it roadworthy and reliable enough to actually use. They brought it to Newark for a bike show in January 2012, and the response was incredible. People remembered it from years ago. They remembered Bob Howard competing with it in the National Rally. They remembered when it won that MCN award, the first tricycle to ever win Special of the Year. The restoration honoured Bob Howard's original vision. They didn't try to improve it or modernise it. They brought it back to what Bob had intended, a properly engineered, utterly bonkers three-wheeler that happened to work brilliantly. Derek finally got his chance to drive the thing that had lived in his head since 1968. He practised in Dave's yard first. Sensible move. Before taking it for the MOT test, he wanted to understand what he was dealing with. His first impression? A bit on the scary side and not quite as much fun as I'd hoped for. But here's the thing about weird old machines. You have to learn to speak their language. By the time Derek had done a couple of local runs and completed the Wold's run, 106 miles in a single day, something had clicked. The grin factor had kicked in. The steering was positive. The acceleration was adequate. The brakes were about what you'd expect from period Ford Popular components. Derek was happy at about 50 miles per hour, which is plenty in something this small and exposed. Fuel consumption worked out to about 50 miles per gallon over those 106 miles. Not bad for a machine that could theoretically hit 70, but was a lot more fun at 60. On one level, this is just a story about two mates who saw something cool in a magazine and eventually tracked it down 40 years later. Nice story, move on. But the Howcette represents something more significant. It represents an era when a skilled person in a shed could just build something like this. No regulations strangling creativity, no type approval bureaucracy, no SVA testing, just engineering knowledge, a parts bin, and the absolute audacity to stick a Velocette engine in a hand-built three-wheeler. Bob Howard wasn't guessing. He was applying professional engineering standards to a personal project. That steering reduction box positioned between the driver's knees, calculated. The hydraulic clutch conversion, designed. The chassis load paths, understood. The Howcette wasn't some bod's job. It was properly engineered, correctly constructed, and weird enough to win national awards. And that magazine photo Derek and Dave saw in 1968, that was Bob Curry's article bringing attention to exactly this kind of creativity. Without that article, two young lads wouldn't have spent 40 years with this odd machine living rent-free in their heads. Derek used the Howcette for 2 years before Dave sold it in November 2014. Derek had a chance to buy it back 4 years later, but went for a new Honda CB500X instead. Pragmatic choice. The Howcette apparently went to Chesterfield for about £10,000, then possibly to France. Last Derek heard, someone was asking $20,000 for it. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But it's out there somewhere. Probably still surprising people with that lock-to-lock steering and that unmistakable Velocette bark. Registration RVO 47F. Somewhere, hopefully, still being driven. Still being appreciated. Still representing what was possible when creative people had the freedom to build weird, wonderful things. Thanks must go to Bob Howard for building the thing in the first place, to Bob Curry for writing that 1968 article that planted the seed, to Dave Wells for being mad enough to actually track it down and buy it, and to Derek Manders for documenting the whole story properly. The Howcette proves that sometimes the weirdest things make the best stories. A Velocette-powered three-wheeler built by a motor engineer who knew what he was doing, loved by two mates for 40 years before they even touched it. Eventually restored, driven, documented, and passed on to its next chapter. If you've seen the Howcette recently or know where it is now, we'd love to hear about it. Drop us a line in the comments. Until next time, this is Not Us, John. Keep building, keep driving, and keep appreciating the weird, wonderful machines that make this hobby so brilliant.